It's Wellness Wednesday. It's Wellness Wednesday. And this Wellness Wednesday, we're talking about how to give effective, useful criticism. And this is inspired because we're doing the not E3 online, previously E3 presentations. And we've gotten the Dragon Age discourse has gotten spicy. And the Ubisoft had a thing and all that stuff, and there's a Call of Duty, and everybody's got opinions, right? And I put a thing up on X, Twitter, that, you know, what I'm seeing out of Dragon Age indicates I'm not the target for this game series anymore. I'm just not. And some people got very, very defensive about this. And I put up, okay, to the excitable, not my thing does not equal bad game. It's definitely not the same, but so many people use it's not my thing as a euphemism for this sucks. And then I'm seeing a lot of people just shit on something in a not effective, not useful, not constructive way. And there's an important middle ground to all of this. And I say important because creatives want to know when something's working. You know, especially when you're working for a big company, sometimes something has to come out and shit the bed so you can go back to management and go, see, I told you. And then you finally get to do the thing you wanted to do all along. But there is an art and a skill to effective criticism. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Help support this channel if you like this content. Become a monthly patron. Patreon support is very, very important for these videos. Patreon.com/Leanna K. Or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use but can't afford it. Coffee.com/Leanna K if you or a friend would like to sign up for a Leanna Care session as well. Link in the description box to take you to the intake form below. Thank you. So, first part of giving effective criticism. Know what you're talking about. This may seem obvious, but it is amazing how many people I see criticizing a game when they haven't played the game. And this has become really bad in the era of Twitch. Now, I Twitch stream, and I think Twitch is a really, really useful thing, especially, you know, I play horror games that some of my audience would find too scary. It's not their thing. I play the more difficult Soulsborne style games for people who find it too hard but want to know what's going on. But I am the first one to tell you that watching a game is not the same as playing a game. And I do try when I do Twitch to give people some insight into what it's actually like to play a game. And I think that's very, very important. A lot of the culture war criticism of Alan Wake 2 was people who clearly had not played the game. And because there's this reaction video culture, this commentary culture, people think they know something without actually watching it for themselves. And that's really not fair to the creator. Saying, I looked into some review stuff, it doesn't seem like it's for me, that's totally fine. But I watch and play and read a lot of stuff that I normally wouldn't because it is important regarding analysis and also just common metaphors with people I work with. And I make sure that I judge it for itself. And that is, I think, a fundamental necessity if you're going to be extremely critical of something. I thought the whole, it's interesting because I'm not surprised Kill the Justice League flopped. I'm surprised that anybody along the pipeline thought that that was a concept that people actually wanted to play. Yeah, the Injustice games did really well, and that's sort of a grimdark alternate DC universe where DC characters beat up on each other, but there's some really ingenious stuff. The story in that first game was great, and then there's cool characters like Gorilla Grodd and stuff like that. Gorilla Grodd or Ultra Humanite? I don't remember anymore. In the second game, there's more to it than just the grimdark, and I have no idea why anybody at that company didn't go, nobody wants to kill the Justice League. I don't understand why anybody, and a lot of people didn't bother to play it, hence the incredible flop that it was. But the people who did play it, it's called Kill the Justice League. And then they complained that you kill Batman in a really non-dignified way. That's not a spoiler. It's called Kill the Justice League. And I do think that this was one of those things that maybe, WB should have listened to some constructive feedback during the process and actually got in people who, play games and like teams like the Suicide Squad. I don't know who they surveyed on this, but obviously there was not an effective feedback process in this development cycle, because the minute I saw the trailer for that thing, it was, this is a terrible idea. I should be all over. It's a Rocksteady DC game. I should be all over that. I don't want to kill the Justice League. I don't. That's just not something I want to put money down on. And there's an example of where, a constructive feedback cycle would have been really, really useful with people who knew what they were talking about. Similarly, I think when we talk about, boring games and flat characters and surface diversity, I've been saying this a lot lately, that you got to have the fights in the dev cycle. There is a back and forth, there is a give and take. And, as somebody who's working on getting a combat demo out and it's late and we're going, this still isn't good enough yet for public consumption, you gotta be critical of stuff and sometimes people that you like. But you have to know what you're talking about. And not just, I Googled it. If the harder you criticize something, the deeper a subject matter expert you better be, especially when it comes to things like interactive narrative storytelling. If you have not ever written an interactive narrative of any scope, if you've never written one, you have no idea how hard it is. And the way people are incredibly harsh on certain end results shows. And I'm telling you, from the inside, when someone just seems to have this uninformed hate for what you do, you just tune it out, because this is somebody who was never going to like what you did, right? So obviously that's a big one. And sorry, my mic keeps peaking. I had it fixed and sorry. The next one, having empathy. Now, I kind of touched on this with the, unless you've written an interactive narrative, you have no freaking idea how hard it is to write an interactive narrative. And when people start pulling apart and they think it's just this teeny little change, and no, it's not a small change. They think it's a small change because they've never actually written one of these motherfuckers before. That's the empathy part of it. Now, am I saying that you need to have written a game to criticize the writing in a game? No. What I'm saying is that at least have an idea of how much work goes into it, and that nobody sets out to write garbage to stick it to some kind of straw enemy. That's just, it's too hard to get a job in games. It's too hard to keep a job in games. These conspiracy theories about games have gotten absurd. And if you talk to anybody who actually works at a AAA studio, on one hand, they understand it. On the other, they are completely baffled because it just shows that there's very little understanding of how much it takes to make even the smallest game. But games of AAA scope, I would personally like to see the scope of AAA games come down some so that they can come out with more polish. And I'd like to see the industry truly rewarding great games, like really, really tight packages. Make that dirty if you want, instead of just most game, instead of size, quality over quantity. I'd love to see that. That's a tangent. Part of the reason I want to see that is that I know that a lot of these, it's a huge writing team and they're doing their best, but a lot of the times they just run out of time. And so they know a narrative is broken. They know there's a loose end, and that's all they can do. If you're expecting perfection and you just seize on this, tertiary thing in the game and just start going, this doesn't make sense, it's garbage, you're not showing a ton of empathy for what it's like to be on the receiving end of that stuff. The reason I don't think AI is ever going to be anything more than a tool when it comes to game design is the same reason that procedural generation did not become this messianic movement. People like the feeling that someone made something. When you look at the map in Elden Ring and experience that environmental storytelling, when you find some cool little Easter egg in Skyrim or Fallout, a human being made that. And that little connection between two people who don't know each other personally, that's really powerful. And AI is never going to be able to replace that. And that's why, because I tell you, that's why devs get up in the morning. Those moments to hear something really touch somebody, they know it's not perfect. So remember, whenever you're criticizing something, and it can be totally deserved, you're criticizing a person, keep that in mind. On that similar note, remember, this is about effective criticism. It's not about being kind. Sometimes you can't be kind. Sometimes, when I used to review games and I had to be brutal because my job as a reviewer was as a consumer advocate, I couldn't be nice, but I could have empathy. And I tried, the more experience I got as a game reviewer, I tried not to overdo the brutality for style, Because, yeah, if you write a really scathing review, it feels really powerful and it gets a lot of traffic because people are like, oh, that was a dunk. But there's nothing more frustrating, I don't know, for me, reading a review that is all this shittiness, like crapping on a whole bunch of stuff, and then 5 out of 5 or 4 out of 5. And it's like, this review does not match the numeric score. And it really does feel as if the reviewer had to, not review it less, but kind of didn't like it. It's very confusing. It's at the point where the numbers are so constantly within 2 points of each other that they're useless. And this is why more and more people rely on word of mouth or streamers or gaming YouTubers to do a little, vertical slice of the game and get a sense for themselves, because, the professional reviews are not terribly useful. But if you are one of those word of mouth reviewers, if you do have a group that you share opinions with, like within your friend group, people aren't going to listen to the person who's always negative or is frequently negative. So only bring out the big guns when you feel like it's really necessary. Because remember, this is about effective criticism. If you go for the negativity hammer too often, it becomes less effective. People just get inured to it. That was a big problem with the Polygons and the Kotakus of the world. It was pretty predictable that they're just going to crap on a lot of things. So why bother reading the review, right? But within friend groups as well, I know there are people that there are certain franchises or certain games, or even talking about it at all. There was a commenter on a previous video who said he just doesn't talk, I think it's a he, about anime with younger people because they just shit all over it and it wouldn't be fun. So don't overdo the criticism. Don't overdo the negativity. They found the sandwich method does not work. The praise, criticism, praise, because people know it's coming and so they don't take in the first bit of praise because they know criticism's following. It's actually criticism, praise, praise, preferably praise, praise. That actually is the most effective, that makes somebody feel like you do have their back and they will listen to you, because there's a lot of screaming out there, and people fix things, people improve things for the people that are going to continue to support them. Only very sick little monkeys try to appease their haters. And this is the thing I don't understand about the people that act like total haters and then complain that the creators hate them. It's mutual. You're savaging everything, say, Disney puts out, but you're complaining that they hate you back. Who cares? If you come across as impossible to satisfy, because, for instance, the minute, a particular type of person, the minute a show is not fronted by a white guy or a thin young white woman, the minute it's not that, you start screaming some kind of conspiracy. Well, of course they're not going to listen to you. You'll never be satisfied unless people do exactly what you want. So that's the next thing, segging into. If you're going to give effective criticism, you have to be aware of your own shortcomings and blind spots, right? I am reading romance novels now because Song from Two Women Talking is a romance writer, and she's coming out with her next book on June 21st. And I haven't read a romance novel since Like my mother had them when I was a teenager, and I flipped through a few of them, and it's just like, hate everybody. So, I mean, 80s Harlequin is what I'm aware of romance novels. I'm the one that would always leave the room when my mother and my sister would watch the Colin Firth Pride and Prejudice again. I do like the Emma Thompson, Jane Austen stuff, but I maintain that Jane Austen is satire, not romance. So if I'm going to help song, because I believe in song, and I've read Calidus Volume 2, and I really liked it, but I think maybe the reason I enjoyed this one more than the last one, when I know who all the characters are, so I'm already involved, right? But I have a bit more understanding of what's going on in the genre and how she is being different than other books out there. And I couldn't be of much help on the first book because I didn't know the genre. I didn't know it was out there. I didn't know the market, and I wasn't going to go, oh, here's all these suggestions I have, talking out my ass. I know nothing. And again, you know, I've been very careful not to, when people share their creative stuff with me, I really try very hard to not overstep, because I get excited when I think something's good and I want to make it great. And not everybody finds that supportive, and I used to get accused of taking things over. So now I kind of sit back a bit and wait and feel it out and ask, do you want help? Because, you know, I had a choice. My enthusiasm could be continued to be taken as trying to take things over, or I can correct for that blind spot and, you know, go with it. But, you know, one of the other blind spots that I was made aware of by the moderators of the Discord, which you can join if you support this channel, was that I take too much crap. And so I have been trying to watch that. And one of the things that I have noticed about taking less crap is, you know, I'm a lot more protective of other people. Part of the reason I'm doing this How to Give Effective Criticism video is I do think that people infer negative intents that are just not there so often, in so many different ways, in politics, in gaming, in video games, in comic books. Like, people just, again, create this straw villain and they lash out against it. And the minute you do that and you're wrong, you've lost the ability to influence. And this is why, if this sounds a lot like Know What You're Talking About, yeah, because your shortcomings and blind spots, bigger picture than the actual work itself, right, can become not knowing what you're talking about. I'm in a real bind regarding Dragon Age 4 because I was a massive fan of Dragon Age pre-Inquisition. Inquisition started to lose me. By the end of the game, I didn't really enjoy it the same way I did the last two, so I didn't play the Trespasser DLC. Of course, there's a ton of story in the Trespasser DLC, including one of the main characters in the new game. So I'm like, what the fuck do I do? I'm not gonna replay all of Inquisition so that I can get a save file to play Trespasser, and I'm gonna have to, I just don't have the time. I'm gonna have to just watch some story videos and be very, very careful on stuff about Harding and anything from Trespasser because I didn't experience it. I don't know. This is becoming an ongoing problem with Dragon Age because some pretty significant lore points end up in tie-in novels and comic book tie-in. What is it? They Who Speak or something like that. The stuff with, what's her name? Yavanna. There's some pretty significant stuff in there. And yes, that's BioWare canon fiction, but still, it's pretty clear they're pulling from it. I mean, you're going to get a very different take on Cole, for instance, in Inquisition, if you read the novels, stuff like that. And this creates a very fragmented audience, right? People have varying knowledge bases of this, and it's getting harder and harder to keep everybody happy. And I think that's part of the reason I feel kind of so left behind, because clearly if they're trying to bring in the Fortnite and Valorant fan base, they're not appealing to nerds like me, who know what really happened to King Merrick because I've read absolutely everything, right? This is something we have to accept, and being too much of a diehard can be a blind spot, because they're trying to bring in new players, because the number of people that need to play a game for it to be successful is much, much higher. It's double what it was when the original Dragon Age Origins came out. You know, back then it was, hey, 5 to 7 million, we got a hit. Now it's 15. And that's obviously a very, very different playing field. And in order to be fair, to be effective, I have to keep that in mind. I mean, that's why, I've talked about Alan Wake 2 ad nauseum. I love it. It's one of those motherhood franchises for me, and that's very special because it feels like the creators cared about it as much as I care about it. And I am quite happy to hand that off to somebody coming into Dragon Age cold. The same way I'm happy to hear that Inquisition was somebody's first Dragon Age game and they loved it. I cannot relate to that experience at all, but it was their first Dragon Age. Okay, great. And I do kind of wish that the numbered games were totally standalone, totally different set of adventurers, totally new adventures. I'd be less bothered that the Benathros, is that how it's pronounced? The Tevinter main city that we see in the previews looks very much like what I imagine the Night Court looks like from A Court of Mist and Fury. But, can I complain about that? Not really, because the original Dragon Age was, okay, so we want to do a Dungeons & Dragons game that isn't a Dungeons & Dragons game. So we're going to take Forgotten Realms, throw in a bit of Discworld, a lot of Game of Thrones, some Dragonlance, some, right? And then create something kind of new by syncretic tradition. So throwing in A Court of Thorn and Roses based on that tradition is not a mistake. It's not a criticism. But look at how much background knowledge I needed to have to say that. And this is where, again, I go back to where I started with this whole thing. My final bit of advice for giving effective criticism is, if in doubt, go with "it's not my thing" versus "it's bad." Because if somebody actually wants you as an audience and you say it's not your thing. They'll go, why? Tell me. Whereas if, you never think that you're ever gonna get this person on board, okay, fair, right? It shows whether you're hitting the mark. Because bad, I believe, requires evidence. You have to make an affirmative case for this is bad. Why? Because otherwise you just seem like a hater who's just having a raw emotional response to something that either wasn't for you or you didn't understand or at any rate, there's no point in getting that worked up to the point that people are going to tune you out because there's just so much emotion coming out of you. You've got to be chill and connect to the stuff you do like, because there is so much to play out there. There is so much to experience, so much to watch. It is an absolute waste of time dwelling on things that you hated. And the ability to praise something as enthusiastically as you criticize other things is a very, very important skill in people taking you seriously when you didn't like something. You've proven that you can like things. You look to like things. People take criticism best from people who were legitimately rooting for it, who wanted to like it, who wanted to give it a chance and just didn't. That's where you're going to get the most effective constructive criticism from. Or not overall, just little things here and there that could have been better. So that's, and I'm sure I'm going to get criticism here, and I guarantee you a lot of the criticism will not be of the constructive. Actually, that's not true, because people I don't get the algorithm viewers for Wellness Wednesday, so this might actually be a constructive dialogue. I'm going to hope so. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for semi-usable but can't afford at coffee.com/LeannaK. That's been coming in really, really, really handy lately. I've been doing some extra sessions for existing clients who can't afford more. So your coffee support is really, really, really useful, especially now. So I appreciate it, and be well.